Welcome to our video today on cross-stitch bookmarks. We decided to shoot a video for this so that people that were interested in participating in this project, in this craft that we were featuring here at the library, could participate from a distance. If anyone is watching this video and would like to participate in this, they can stop by and pick up a kit from the library here in Priest River and follow along in the project. So, with that said, my name's Krista. I'm the program coordinator here for the district for Priest River and Blanchard libraries, and I am by no means an expert on cross-stitch at all. I like doing it. My fronts look a whole lot better than my backs. This is for beginners or people that just want to do this particular project. This is the project we're looking at doing. It's super easy and simple. It can be done easily within just a couple of hours at the most. This is a pattern that I got from through a woman in Melbourne, Australia, Mez Designs, and she's allowed us to use this for our project here at the library. It's a bookmark. There's two. There's with the kit, there's a vertical bookmark like this, and there's also a horizontal one that that you could choose from, one or the other. We're going to feature this particular one for the example on how to go ahead and do this project. It's just easier for me to choose just one rather than explain both. Same principles apply to both of them though. So this is the pattern we're going to be using. Each one of these larger squares here represents 10 blocks, 10 pieces of pattern. We're using 14 count Aida cloth for this project. That means in each inch of the cloth there are 14 little squares. So this particular pattern is counted off in tens, which is just fine. It's just easy to know that what these are counted in. And this is counted cross stitch. So we will be using in the kits that we're providing at no cost, you will have a hoop, you will have the Aida cloth, you will have the embroidery thread for this, which is black for the lettering, red for the heart up here. You will also be provided with a needle, 24 size needle, which is for cross stitch, and also we will provide some flannel backing that you can finish your bookmark in. So those will be available if anyone is interested in doing this project with us. Today I'm going to start by trying to get some of the things done for explaining cross stitch in terms of how to start and that kind of thing. And we're going to see how this video goes. I'm going to just experiment with it. So if anyone has any suggestions, please feel free to send us an email at the library, which is library@westbonnerlibrary.org. So without further ado, okay, here's our basic pattern. I have measured out roughly what this is going to be in terms of inches, and it's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, approximately 6 inches, which is going to fit pretty neatly in this space here. In the hoop. So each one of these will have the cloth and the hoop that you put it in. The hoop gives it some tension. It makes it easier to stitch and work with and keep a hold on. It's easier than, otherwise you crumple up the cloth a bit. The first thing you're going to want to do is determine where the center of your pattern is. So the center of the pattern, if you see on here, there are arrows on this pattern on each side, top and bottom. If you follow those arrows, they meet here in the center. Here's the X that they've marked in the center. It's just a little, it's down 1 notch from where I think I would normally mark it. And then what you're going to do, in our case, you could start right here. I mean, you could just, you count 1, 2, and you start your stitch here. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and count up to the top of the pattern, here at the very top of the eye. So I've already counted off these things, and there are 40 squares up to the top of that eye, and then I'm going to go 4 stitches over. And I would love to have a pointer right now, but I don't have one, and that's not quite tall enough. But we're going to change the camera angle and start working from the top down, and so I'm going to show it on camera by hand. So this is where we're going to go. We're going to count from this center piece. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, anyway, all the way up. I counted them off and it ends up with 40 right here, and then I'm going to go over 4 and just adjust so that that's where that is. It's not super critical in this pattern to be exactly 1 square right or left. Is not going to make a big difference because it's a long and narrow pattern and you have plenty of cloth to work with on this. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to start at the top and we'll work our way down and finish it out down here. And then what we'll do is we'll fold the edges in, we will fuse them with some fuse tape, and you can seal up the back with the flannel, either red or black. So without further ado, we'll see what we can do to get started on the rest of this video. Thank you for joining us, by the way. And if you have any suggestions, as always, let us know. Thanks. Okay, welcome to our part 2 of our cross-stitch bookmark video. This is the first time I've ever done a hands-on kind of video like this, so bear with me. We're going to give this a shot. Okay, I already demonstrated to you on the board, on the whiteboard, and through the computer technology that we have, what the pattern looks like and the explanation of the finding the center of your pattern and then finding a good starting point. This is the pattern in print right here in front of me. So I'm looking at this, and what I've done so far is I've counted from here to here, the top of the eye, from the center mark here to the top of the eye is 40 squares. So each one of these squares, and I'll see if I can get this on video pretty well. I chose on my Aida cloth here, I chose a center point, that this is a center point. You can kind of see it hopefully on the camera that this is a little bit larger hole. I've just kind of made that so I can just tell the difference. Then I'm going to count to the next hole up is 1, the next hole is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I went all the way up to 40. My 40th hole is right here. I made this hole just a little bigger so I could see the difference between it and the other. So this is my center hole. This is 40. In this particular case, I'm now going to drop down 1 because the 40th one was just above the eye here on my pattern right there. It landed just above that. So I'm going to go down because I like to start on the bottom part of the X. I'm going to go down 1, and then I'm going to count over 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to start in the lower left corner of that first X. That corresponds to this right here. If you can see this on the camera, on the pattern, that corresponds to this X right here. So then I'm going to drop down 1 from there. Or actually, I think I'll just stay right with that top one because I can. I'm going to work this pattern from the top down. There are many, many, many ways to do your cross-stitch pattern or start your backing and things. I have friends and coworkers of mine who are far better at doing cross-stitch on the back, making the backs of their embroidery look as good as the fronts of their embroidery. In my case, I'm doing a simple knot. You just do a simple square knot. You spin it around your finger a couple of times, roll it, and you can just make a nice simple knot, just big enough so that it won't pull through the Aida cloth. So we're going to start this pattern where I've counted off to. Remember, I went from the very center point, I counted up 40 because that's what this pattern is, distance from the center to the top of that eye, and then I went over 4 and I went down 1 just because I like to start at the bottom of my X's. So I am now stitching. It calls for, let's see, what does our pattern want? It wants 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 horizontal cross stitches. So I'm starting, this is how I do it. There's plenty of other people's opinions on how they do things. I'm doing this angle here So I'm doing from lower left to upper right, and I'm going to go 8 stitches across. So I'm doing, there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can always go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll do 8. Okay, there's 8 angled stitches from the lower left to the upper right, crossing each one of these little squares. The square is actually formed by the holes in between, or the holes around the pattern of that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop straight down from that last stitch. So now we're going to be going from lower right to upper left. And that then makes your X. So each one of these, because we went and did we're doing a row at a time, not each individual X. Some people like to do individual X's. That's just not how I was taught to do it. Mostly I think because my grandmother was a needle pointer, and she did running stitches like this. I'm losing my thread. Oh, and I failed to mention something very, very, very important. Okay, like I said, this is the first time I'm making these videos. Something very important. What I chose, what this pattern calls for, and what majority of cross stitch patterns, especially with 14 count, which is a medium size Aida cloth. They make it much smaller than this. By the way, there's our first row completed. So what most of these cross stitch patterns call for, especially like I said, using 14 count Aida cloth, is they call for 2 strands of embroidery thread. So before I started this video, I actually prepared my needle with that. When you have a skein of embroidery thread like this, and this is standard embroidery thread, and it comes in 6 strands. What you're going to do is you are going to separate those strands into 2s. This pattern calls for 2 strands. Most of them do. Most patterns I've seen do. And you need to separate those. So you're going to split off 2 of those strands. That's what I did earlier. And the length you cut from your skein of embroidery thread, most people shoot for somewhere around 16 inches, and that way you don't get too tangled when you're separating them. So here I've separated 2 off of there, and they're done side by side and treated as if they were 1 thread. So that's what I'm stitching with currently right now, is just 2 strands of embroidery thread. And then you save the others for the next time, or the next go round. So we finished our first row, and the last stitch pushed through this upper left corner of that. So now you're going to drop down. The next row is directly underneath, so you're going to come under, you're going to come up in the empty hole directly below where your very, very first stitch popped up. And you're going to do the same thing again. You're going to do 8, this pattern calls for 8 stitches across. You're going to do 8 stitches across. And if I can see here and get my needle through, 8 stitches across here, just like we did, because this is the top of that I in I Love Books. We're going to do, whoops, sorry I bumped the camera there. It's kind of an interesting position to be in with the camera like this. Okay. We're making progress here. This is a very quick project, by the way. There are other projects that take much longer, but this is kind of a good snowy day kind of thing to do. We got quite a bit of snow yesterday, and then it kind of melted off, and it's supposed to come back again tonight. We are now in November, so it can snow anytime it wants. This is a good project for those days where it just doesn't feel like you want to go outside. And you can stay inside and make a bookmark. You could even make these for gifts. That would be a really great idea. Okay, we're finishing up this row here. Finishing it up. And we'll try and keep this segment pretty short here. Okay, so we've now finished, in our pattern, we've now finished the two first rows, the top rows of the eye. Now we're going to start with the long part. It's the same principle. You're just going to move your thread, count in 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares, and you're going to start on the bottom left of the 4th square. So I'm going to count this in. That's why they call this counted cross stitch. 1, 2, 3. There's the 4th one. I'm going here. So this is the hole I'm going in. I've counted over the 3 spaces, and now I'm starting at the bottom of the 4th space, and we're only doing 2 stitches. This is for the vertical of the eye. So you're going to do the same exact thing, but you're only going 2 stitches instead of 8 stitches. All right. See? And we turned around, came back. There's the first 2. So I'm going to pause the video here. You will then continue on that same pattern. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these 2 cross stitch rows. So that's the first one. We're going to do 5 more, and then we're going to go back out to the end of the eye, and we'll come back out. And then we're going to go ahead and start the heart. Same exact idea. But we're going to pause our video here. Consider this, I guess this would be part 2 of our video series on cross stitch bookmarks. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Okay, welcome to our next segment. Where we left off last time is I had just finished the first letter, the I here. And so now we're going to start the red heart since we were working from top to bottom. I'm going to start the red heart of the pattern, which if you look at this pattern, what separates the I from the heart, the next row is 1 row, 1 empty space. And if you look here on the left, if you're going from left to right, you're going to drop down 1 row and go over to the left 1, and that's where you're going to start that particular row. And there will be 4 stitches there, then a gap of 3, and then 4 stitches. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we separated the thread before. And remember that each time that you're stitching, you are separating out 2 strands of thread from the 6 that are part of each embroidery thread. Some patterns call for 2, some patterns call for 3, and there's some, that you might use all 6 at once. But for cross stitch, most of the time, especially with 14 count cloth, you're going to use just 2. So we thread our needle, and then like I said before, some of my co-workers are much better at their back finishing than I am, but I like just doing a knot. I
probably one of these days ought to learn how to do the fancy, super fancy stuff. Okay, so we're going to look at this and we're going to go down one row. So here's the one row we're going down, and then we're going to go over one. And I'm making that little hole right there a little bit bigger. That shows me the top of that one. So because I'm used to starting like this, from the lower left to the upper right, and we're going to do 4 stitches. Two, three, and 4, like that. And then there was a gap in the pattern, you can see here, there's a gap of 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and then another 4 stitches. That forms the top row of the heart. So I'm going to count over 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, and I'm going to start there. So I've left 3 spaces in between this portion. Okay, now we have 4. Now don't be too surprised. I'm looking at the pattern, and the way this pattern is written, it is one outside of this here. So we went, remember we started 1 square to the left, lined up with that I, and then over on this side is actually 2. So it's just a little off center of that. It's not a big deal. So we're going to finish this. We'll finish this row just like we did the others. Let's see if I can make my needle find its spot there. We're going to jump ahead in a minute here, so off camera. I think most everybody following this has probably got the idea by now. I could feel something tugging at my thread back here. Sometimes that happens where something feels a little funny, and it might be the tail that gets stuck. And remember, like we talked about in the previous segments, sometimes your thread likes to get twisty on you. So sometimes it's a good idea at the end of a row to just let it go so it can spin and get the twisties out. Okay, so that's the top row of the heart. Then the next part of the pattern of this, you can see right here, the next row kicks out to the left 1 and goes 6, gap of 1, and then another 6. So we're going to kick out 1. There's no row separating this, not like the separation from the letters. So you're just going over to the left 1 square, and it's going to meet up like this. There we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to continue on with this, with the heart, going ahead and stitching the heart, and then I'll jump back down to the next letter and keep going. And then we'll talk about how to finish this project, because this is a pretty quick project. So we'll be back in our next segment, and through the magic of camera technology will have moved on pretty quickly. Okay, so you can see the project is coming along nicely. And one thing I wanted to point out as I was stitching along here is that when you get to the O's or the B's, that kind of thing, what I've been doing is you know, starting at the top, doing these 2 rows, and then going down the side and then back up the other side. So it comes out like you don't skip over from one side of the O to the other side of the O just because it's in the same row. I would travel around the O like that. Okay, we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, I'm back. Now, I've completed all the letters, I've completed the heart, I've completed the cross stitch pattern. At this point, I've trimmed my Aida cloth down to about 3 3/4 inches wide, 3.5 inches wide, roughly. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches long. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to evenly fold these until I like the way it looks in the front. So this is pretty even here. And I've kind of creased it a little bit so I can see what I'm doing on the back. So I'm flipping it over, it's face down, the pattern is touching the table. This is the fuse cloth. This is a thin ironable fuse cloth. It's kind of like fabric glue in a fabric. I mean, it feels very soft, it's very lightweight. I'm going to lay this down on the back of the cross stitch bookmark that we've done here, and I'm going to fold it over. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm folding it, I'm putting it so that it's kind of at the back of the stitching and the back, so that these 2 edges can go together. And I'm just going to run my iron, hot iron, over the back here so it sticks itself together. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that when I put the backing on, it'll have something nice and solid folded over to stick to. My iron has been used for other crafts and has a couple of spots on it. So that didn't take much, and now this is fused together like that. And then I'm going to check and see how I feel about the length of this. And I think maybe just going over just a tiny bit on either side, 1/2 inch should do it. So I'll take a little bit more fuse cloth. I have a little square here. I don't know if you can see it right there, just left over from my trimmings. And I think I'll just fold this over. I'm going to cut it. This is kind of magical stuff. You can just do all kinds of cool things with it. Okay, so we're going to do that. Iron this down just a tiny bit, just to get it hot enough so that it melts. It's a very thin kind, so it's not going to negatively affect your stitching. And I think we'll do the same for this end. Just fold it over a little bit. Get this. Kind of tacks it down. Now the other thing you could do, if you don't have fuse cloth, you could also use like a hot glue gun, but be careful not to use too much glue, because if you do use too much glue, let's see what we think this is good. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to trim off these corners just a tiny bit so that they don't show when we put the backing on. Because we're going to put a black flannel backing on it that matches the black of the front of the bookmark. There we go. So we're set to do that part now. Now I'm down to, let's see, measuring on here, it's 1 3/4 inches folded about. So I'm going to do about 1 3/4 inches. One of my edges is a lot straighter because it's a machined edge. So we're gonna go, I'm using a rotary cutter here because it's easier. So I'm gonna go just in from 1 3/4 inches. And try and get this. And if you're going to use a rotary cutter, please be careful. These things are super, super sharp. Okay, doesn't have to be totally perfect, but let's see how this looks. Okay, I think I'm going to trim this down just a little more on the edge here. Now, one of my coworkers suggested also that if you wanted to, you could edge the fabric. You could put a little, you could overlap the backing as if you were doing like this and make it a little wider, and maybe use some pinking shears, which are the zigzag scissors. You could use some pinking shears along this edge here just to give it kind of a ruffly edge. We didn't have any pinking shears here at the library that would work, so we're going to go with just the straight up back. And I need to trim this down just a little more. I think I'll use my scissors this time. Just to kind of clean up the edge. I need to remember my fabric scissors sometime. Might make this just a little bit easier. There. Okay, let's see how this fits now. We're going to trim this to the back. Oh yeah, that's better. And all you're trying to do is you're trying to cover up your seams. And that looks pretty good. Go scoot it over just a little. Yeah. That looks pretty darn good. Give it a little bit straighter edge right here where I see a little bumpy. There. And this is a fairly thin, this is black felt. It's just craft felt. I actually got it at the dollar store. It works nicely for this kind of project. So we're going to trim this a little bit down from the edge right there. Let's see how this looks. Okay. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, all right, so we're going to use our fuse tape again, and we're going to make a little piece. You can just cut it or tear it. Tearing it's just fine. And we're going to lay this on the back. I'm going to put it in from the edge just a little bit. Tear another piece here. We want it so that it attaches well to the flannel backing. We got a little piece of flannel there. I'm overlapping just a little bit. And we'll make sure that our flannel, oops, is covering. Oop, it slipped off. This is kind of tricky. It's like working with spider webs. It's very challenging. Not that I work with spider webs a lot, but okay. I think we've got it now. And this should, it's not, oh, rats. Okay, I think we've got it. Yep, all right. So very carefully, do not linger on the flannel too long. Make sure that it stays flat. The heat of the iron will go right through to the fuse tape and it'll seal. There we go. Feels like it's sealing up nicely. And if you have any spots that you're concerned about at all, you can always, like I have this little corner right here that I'm, uh-oh, I think I'm melting my mat. Uh-oh. Probably not a good idea to do that on there, I guess. I'm going to just put a little piece on this corner that I didn't quite get that on. And I'm going to just tack it with the tip of the iron. And just trim any fuzzies off that you see. But I think that looks pretty good. And there we are. After this nice long video and all the parts that went with it, here you go. Here's the bookmark. Now, these kits are going to be available at the library for a period of time. You'll be able to pick it up. It'll have all the things in it that you need to complete this bookmark, including some fuse tape and the flannel. You'll have to provide your own iron. Try not to melt your mat like I did, but there you go. We're all set. That's it. There's the bookmark.